I agree. As a socialist, the capitalists will only lead us to our demise. Their desire for profit is stronger than their desire to see this planet thrive. I think that's been proven by history. What Jay is saying here, I think it's being proven even more now, right? Like we have the climate crisis looming, which the Democrats, the Joe Bidens of the world, and Kamala Harris acknowledge. Like, yeah, climate change is real. We got to do something about it. Here, let's send $50 billion of weapons to Ukraine and fight a proxy war against Russia. It's like, how's this doing anything about climate change? It's not. Um, they don't care about these things. They're literally pushing us closer to an ecological catastrophe. And this is why Malthusianism, which will actually lead into our next segment, this is why Malthusianism is becoming part of the ruling class ideology. Sort of depopulationism, liberal environmentalism, like everybody just needs to consume less and, use cardboard utensils, rather than eco-socialism, right? Rather than looking at the metabolic rifts that are created in Earth's natural recycling processes through human production, which that's what climate change really is, on a scientific level. Not that I claim to be a scientist, but if you have planned production, you and not this anarchic market system where a handful of oligarchs plan production based on what makes them the most profit. You can produce things in a way that are in harmony with the Earth's natural processes. That's ego socialism. That's the antithesis of Malthusianism, which is this liberal ideology of depopulationism. We'll just produce way less. The masses are just too greedy and they're consuming too much. Um, you know, this sort of ideology has been used for a while to like not let the productive forces develop in Africa or Latin America. Like the US consumes more than like 6 times more than the average country in the world. And then when Africa wants to industrialize, right, when they want to create machines that are going to vastly increase standard of living and productive capacity, the US is like, "Oh, think about how much you're polluting," as we pollute 6 times more than them in reality and do nothing to reverse it. But it's good to be aware of this Malthusian ideology because Marx has been Marx combated Robert Thomas Malthus way back in the day, like very thoroughly. There's a huge section of Capital Volume 1 that is devoted to combating Malthusianism, because Malthus was literally arguing, when there's less people, when there's less working class people, when the masses are a smaller population, wealth is higher. And then eventually they run out of food and society runs out of commodities to feed those people, and depopulation happens. And Malthus used like the Irish potato famine as an example of how depopulation happens when there's not enough to feed everyone. And that's just how economics works. And Malthus did not use much evidence to prove his theories. Of course not, because his theories are nonsense. So Marx spends a lot of time debunking them and showing no, the famines that Malthus attributes to population getting too big are attributable to capitalism. These were economic crises created where people didn't have enough money, enough of the universal equivalent, to buy food because their wages were too low, and they were forced off of the farmland by speculating corporations. We talked about how in China's version of socialism, people have been given their own land plot by the government, which is protected from corporate speculation and allows them to grow food, especially in rural areas. And this is to combat the sort of speculation and enclosure of the commons, as Marx calls it in Capital, that happens when capitalism is expanding and when capitalism is conquering all the land. Peasants are forced off their land and into the towns where they search for industrial jobs. And if they don't find them, they die of famine. So Marx is saying this isn't, these aren't famines of population, Malthus. These are famines of production, or famines of capitalist contradictions, even not even production. Because capitalism produces enough to feed everyone. There was enough to feed everyone a lot of these famines, but people didn't have enough money to buy the food. So it was really just a contradiction, a crisis of capitalism. So I thought it was just Marx who combated Malthus, but actually George Hegel, who Marx bases a lot of his work off of, was alive at the time of Malthus. I had to look it up after I read this. But he combated this Malthusian ideology too. And there's a John Paul Sartre quote that says, like, every argument you find from the bourgeois is just like a reformulation of some argument that existed before Marx that Marx already destroyed. And that's a little bit dogmatic, like seeing Marx as a god rather than just a thinker who developed a really good method or lens for analyzing social society. But it is funny because it does seem true sometimes. Like, liberals are digging up and repurposing this Malthusian depopulation ideology as the reason to combat climate change. Oh, bye, Jay. See you later. I will check my DM. Thank you very much. Thank you for hanging out with us for so long. Appreciate it. But anyways, it's a good quote, that Sartre quote, because yeah, there are so many arguments that have already been thoroughly refuted that are just repurposed and modernized. And that's exactly what this depopulationism is. Let us keep hoarding our capital and hoarding our wealth and exploiting the vast majority of society, and taxing the crap out of you, hiring thousands of more IRS agents to audit the working class, so we can pay for our endless wars of expansion. And then when climate change becomes a problem, we'll just let the masses be depopulated, and that'll fix everything. It's the same ideology it's always been. Let us hoard our wealth, let us not take care of the environment, and let us just not care about the masses. And Thomas Malthus tried to put justification and argument to that, which was insanely ridiculous, which is why Marx and Hegel refuted it so thoroughly. But the liberals are just repurposing it today. So it's good to know its ideological roots. But on page 38, George Hegel says something super anti-Malthus that I wanted to read. Which part did I want to read? When the admiration of God that is revealed in natural things such as trees and animals is opposed to what is human, far removed from a religion of ancient Egyptians. Okay, so he's criticizing the ancient Egyptian religions and religion in general, for seeing the divine, or what connects all of life, or what is holy or universal in nature. And he's saying Christianity thinks it's evolved, the highest of all form of religion or whatever, but it's similar to the Egyptian religion, which was drawn from cats and dogs. And then he criticizes Hinduism because it gives reverence to cows. The cows and apes in the Hindu religion are held in reverence and are scrupulously concerned for the maintenance and nourishment of these animals. The people are in India. While they allow men to suffer hunger, or suffer and hunger. Who would put animals above the hunger of men? It seems to be expressed by such a view that humans' actions as regards nature is ungodly. Humans' actions as regards nature, so production. That the operations of nature are divine operations, but what man produces from nature is ungodly. But the productions of human reason might at least be esteemed as much as nature. In doing so, however, we cede less to human reason than is permitted to us. If the life and the action of animals be divine, human action must stand much higher and must be worthy to be called divine in an infinitely high sense. The preeminence of human thought must forthwith be avowed. So, despite the maybe old school European colonial racism that George Hegel's holding on to there, not criticizing colonialism and causing famines in India, but exclusively blaming Hinduism. Still, he's criticizing religion, which sees the divine and places nature and animals above human reason and human thought, even going so far as to say basically they put it above human labor, which, Marx takes Hegel much further, and labor is a very big deal for Marx. But there's a lot of times in Hegel's writing where he's basically being a materialist and basically, going right up to a Marxist idea without saying what Marx would have said, or coming to the exact same conclusions. And that's one of them. Where he says that people see, human labor's productions, people like Malthus see the productions of human labor and human reason, using reason to interact with nature, which is production, which is the key, the base of society for Marx. People see that as below animals, because nature's processes are divine. And as I said, we do know that nature's processes are naturally recycling, right? So that human production does interrupt nature's natural processes. But we know this because of human reason, right? And we need to understand that human reason should be placed over animals and over nature, and that we should maximize production and do production in a way that's sustainable with the ecology, mostly so that the ecology doesn't kill humans, though. Humans are always prioritized. Humanity is always number one. And reason is the number one way that we can find our way out of problems and continue to advance as a species. And we need to have what Marx really comes along and says then is we need to have more reason in production. And Marx was one of the first ecologists. He wrote a lot about the soil and overuse of the soil in agriculture and how that can decrease food production, stuff like that. But he says we need more reason in production. The Enlightenment gave us reason in government. We have democracies, at least they claim to be democracies. But Marx is saying, but we have no reason in production. We have no reason to how we organize the classes. We just have one oligarchic class who rules over the other, and they produce anarchically based on the whims of the market and in a way that maximizes profit rather than well-being. So if we inject reason into production, if the masses gain a hold of production and carry it out in a more reasonable manner, like I said, we can do it in a way that supports all of humanity, supports the working masses, but also supports the ecology, supports the environment and sustains it in a way that allows for the continued sustenance and continued development and growth of humanity. Check out, if people want a book on that, by an actual scientist, not by my dumbass, because science is literally like my worst subject. Literally the worst. Check out this Marxist ecologist, Ian Angus, and specifically his book, Facing the Anthropocene. So he talks about in this book, it's one of my favorite books. He talks about how the modern ecologists, modern Marxist ecologists, they've been reading like John Bellamy Foster, who's a Marxist ecologist, and they've been keeping up with modern ecological literature and some of the things China's doing and whatnot. But actually, the sort of secret to understanding eco-socialism and climate change and whatnot has been in Marx the whole time. In chapter 3 of Capital Volume 1, he talks about the natural processes of nature, and where nature, if humans stay away from it and don't touch it, it will continue recycling itself and growing on its own. It has these natural recycling processes that allow nature to, continue to live and grow and develop, and different forms of life interact with other forms of life. But what happens when capitalist production, which is, like I said, based on making a profit and based on the market, and has no concern for the ecology, or even really the working masses who create the wealth of capitalism, a metabolic rift is created in these natural recycling processes. So basically, certain chemicals in the earth aren't able to recycle themselves in the way that they're used to, and you end up with things like too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And like I said, using human reason and using science and understanding production better and decreasing the gap between mental and physical labor, as Marx would say, we can produce in a way that is in harmony with these natural processes. We can continue to understand these processes better and better and better, and adapt how we produce to them. If we have socialism, if we have ego-socialism, but we don't. We have anarchic, market-driven capitalism, profit-driven capitalism, which could care less about the ecology's natural processes. So you can see in the way Ian Angus sets this up, our only way to save ourselves is eco-socialism. Otherwise we'll allow the capitalists to literally destroy the freaking planet. And then when you understand Malthus, and that the liberals today are pushing depopulationism and Malthusianism, the ruling classes, people like Bill Gates are. And this is something Marx has been combating from the bourgeois ideologues, the ruling class ideologues, since way back when. And it's been something Hegel's been combating since even before that. I don't know. I guess you kind of see how sick and evil it is that there's this imperialist ruling class trying to hang on to their power. And they see that if they keep going this way, it's going to lead to ecological crises as well as economic crises, which could lead, tons of people to die. And then they embrace depopulationism as their ideology, then Malthusianism. Oh, there's just too many people. It just got too many people on Earth. We can't produce enough for all of them. Some of them got to go. It's terrible. And that's why I always profess eco-socialism, though, because what are you going to do about the climate crisis if you just don't believe in climate change, or if you're just an anti-Malthusian, right? If you're only against Malthus and depopulationism, which good. But then what's the alternative, right? What's the alternative for construction that doesn't destroy the planet? And I don't know if a lot of people know what that is, so they just kind of ignore climate change. But that's not good. Watch Dr. Paul Cockshot's videos using Marxist ecology to explain how climate change is real. And then read this Ian Angus book about facing the Anthropocene, because we need to have a debunk to this depopulation as BS. Because socialism in the past, the Soviet Union industrialized the country, but that did cause more pollution, and destroy a lot of nature, which as socialists, bringing people out of poverty and developing human civilization is good, and that comes first. But we can also take care of the earth and take care of its natural processes, and make sure the things that we need from the earth to sustain ourselves don't get used up and destroyed.